Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some tricky English expressions you've asked about idioms and slang. You know, those phrases that can leave you feeling a little lost sometimes, especially if you're learning English.
Exactly. They're like little puzzles, aren't they?
Yeah. But they're also so much fun to use once you get the hang of them. And that's what we're here for. We're going to unpack 4 expressions today. On cloud nine, flabbergasted, let the cat out of the bag and throw shade.
We'll go beyond just the definitions. We'll look at the fascinating history and culture woven into these phrases. You'll be surprised how much there is to discover.
Oh, I love that. It's like we're going on a treasure hunt through language. Okay, so let's start with a feeling we all love. Pure happiness. You know, that moment when you're so overjoyed, you're on cloud nine.
Ah, yes, on cloud nine. It's that state of pure bliss, like you're floating above the world, nothing can bring you down.
Exactly. Like when you achieve something you've been working towards for ages, or maybe you finally get that dream job, you'd be on cloud nine for weeks.
Absolutely. Our source actually uses the example of someone winning a scholarship and feeling on cloud nine all week long. It's that kind of overwhelming joy.
I can totally relate to that. But it's funny, though. How did we end up connecting happiness with a cloud? I mean, they can be pretty gloomy sometimes, right?
Right. It's a bit of a mystery, actually. But there's a theory that links it to 20th century meteorology. Back then, scientists were busy classifying clouds, and maybe, just maybe, Cloud 9 was seen as this highest, most unreachable cloud, therefore the most blissful.
Oh, I like that idea. Makes you want to just picture yourself, lounging on a fluffy cloud nine, feeling amazing.
Right. It's a great way to remember it. And speaking of remembering, our source also mentions other ways to express extreme happiness, like over the moon in seventh heaven.
Oh, yeah, or ecstatic. It's like a whole vocabulary for pure joy.
Exactly. And each synonym, it has its own little shade of meaning, which is what makes language so fascinating.
I know, right? It's like a giant toolbox, and we get to choose the perfect word for every situation.
Precisely. But let's shift gears for a moment, shall we? From pure joy to a different kind of extreme emotion, what about when you're utterly, completely surprised?
Oh, you mean like, whoa, I did not see that coming. That jaw-dropping, speechless kind of surprise.
You got it. That's where flabbergasted comes in.
Flabbergasted. I love that word. It's so much more expressive than just saying surprised.
It is, isn't it? It captures that feeling of being totally caught off guard, like you've been completely blown away. Our source even suggests picturing your own flabbergasted face. Eyes wide, mouth open. It's a fun way to remember the feeling.
Uh-huh. I'm trying to picture it now. And the word itself, it almost sounds like you're sputtering in shock, like flabbergasted.
It does, doesn't it? There's something about the sound of it that just conveys that sense of shock and disbelief.
I totally agree. But what if flabbergasted feels a bit too strong for the situation? Are there other ways to express that same feeling?
Of course. There's astonished, astounded, dumbfounded. They all convey that sense of intense surprise, each with its own little nuance.
So many choices.
Yeah.
It's like choosing the perfect shade of surprise. Okay, but it's even more surprising than being flabbergasted.
What's that?
When a secret gets accidentally revealed, like when someone, oops, lets the cat out of the bag.
Yes. That's a classic. To reveal something that was supposed to stay hidden?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like imagine you're planning a surprise party and someone accidentally mentions it in front of the guest of honor.
Oh, no.
Like, disaster. The cat's out of the bag. But seriously, where does that expression even come from?
Well, one theory takes us back to old-fashioned marketplaces. Apparently, some sneaky sellers would try to pass off a cat as a more valuable piglet, by hiding it in a bag. But once the bag was opened, well,
Yeah.
there's your cat revealing the trickery.
Oh, wow. Can you imagine? You think you're getting this prize piglet and then, bam, Fluffy leaps out. That's hilarious.
It is, isn't it? And it definitely makes the idiom more memorable.
It totally does. Our source actually suggests visualizing that exact scene. A cat bursting out of a bag to remember the meaning.
That's a good one. And they also offer some synonyms like spill the beans, divulge, reveal. But remember, they all have slightly different meanings, right?
Right. Like spill the beans implies it was an accident, while divulge sounds more intentional, like you're choosing to share information. So even though they all mean to reveal a secret, the right word can change the whole tone.
It's all about nuance. And speaking of nuance, let's talk about a phrase that's become super popular, especially among younger people these days.
You mean throwing shade?
You got it! Throw shade! Have you ever witnessed some epic shade throwing?
Absolutely. It's like an art form, isn't it?
It is. Throw shade has really entered the mainstream vocabulary, but it still has that edgy, indirect quality to it. It's not a direct insult. It's more like,
Subtle dig.
exactly, delivered with a wink and a smile. Like you're not openly criticizing, but you're definitely letting them know what you think.
Our source uses the example of someone subtly undermining a rival's proposal during a meeting. They're not yelling or being rude, but they're definitely throwing shade.
Perfect example. And what's fascinating is that this phrase, it emerged from a very specific cultural context, the 1980s drag ballroom scene.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the documentary Paris is Burning gives a glimpse into that world. Shade was all about witty, often playful criticism, a way to outsmart your opponent with words.
It's amazing how the LGBTQ+ community has shaped language like that, bringing phrases like this into the mainstream. And our source even gives us a visual to help remember it.
Oh, what's that?
Imagine casting a shadow over someone, dimming their light with your criticism. So clever.
It is. Of course, there are other ways to express that subtle disapproval, like criticize, mock, or subtly insult. But throw shade just has that extra bit of flair, don't you think?
Totally. Okay, so we've unpacked 4 expressions so far, and I'm already noticing a theme emerging here.
Oh, what's that?
It's like our language itself is surprised by life's twists and turns.
Interesting. What makes you say that?
Well, think about it. On cloud 9, flabbergasted, even let the cat out of the bag. They all revolve around this element of surprise, like our words are trying to catch up with the unexpected.
You're right. There is a common thread there. It makes you wonder, why is surprise such a powerful emotion that we need so many ways to express it?
That's a great question. Maybe it's because surprise, it disrupts our expectations. It forces us to react in the moment, whether it's the joyous shock of cloud 9 or the bewilderment of being flabbergasted. We need those expressive words to capture those sudden shifts in feeling.
That makes sense. Like surprise shakes us up and our language is trying to keep pace. And speaking of letting the cat out of the bag,
Yeah.
isn't it interesting how that idiom hints at a secret being revealed, even though it's about surprise? Like the
Yeah.
surprise is that the secret's out.
Ooh, you're picking up on something subtle but important.
Mm.
There's definitely a connection between surprise and secrets.
Right. Like a surprise party only works if the secret is kept. And when someone lets the cat out of the bag, they're not just ruining the surprise, they're exposing something that was meant to stay hidden.
So we've got surprise, secrets, and now I'm thinking about throwing shade, which is all about criticism, but delivered in a sneaky way. It's like a secret weapon of disapproval.
You're spot on. There's definitely a link between secrets and criticism. Sometimes we criticize openly, but other times we choose to be more indirect. It's like we're whispering the criticism instead of shouting it.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. It started with happy clouds, and now we're uncovering this whole web of surprise, secrets, and criticism hidden within these everyday phrases.
Isn't it fascinating how language reveals so much about human nature? We use these expressions without even thinking, but they hold clues to how we navigate social situations, how we express emotions, and even how we wield power.
It really makes you realize that there's so much more to language than just the words themselves. It's like a code we use to communicate all these complex ideas and feelings.
Exactly. And that's why idioms can be so tricky, especially for someone learning English. They rely on this unspoken understanding of cultural context and figurative language.
It must be like trying to solve a riddle if you've never encountered these expressions before. And then you add slang to the mix, which is constantly changing and evolving. It's like trying to hit a moving target.
It can be challenging, but it's also what keeps language dynamic and exciting. Think of it this way. Learning idioms and slang isn't just about memorizing definitions. It's about gaining fluency in the art of communication itself.
Okay, so what's your advice for English learners who might feel intimidated by all of this? Should they just avoid idioms and slang altogether to avoid making mistakes?
Not at all. In fact, embracing idioms and slang is crucial for anyone who wants to truly master the English language. It's like unlocking a secret level of understanding.
I get it, but it can feel overwhelming. Like, where do you even begin?
Well, start by focusing on the expressions that resonate with you, the ones you hear frequently or find particularly interesting. Don't try to learn everything at once.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Precisely. Pay attention to how these expressions are used in real conversations, in movies, in music. You'll start to notice patterns and gain a feel for those nuances. And don't be afraid to experiment. The more you use them, the more comfortable you'll become.
That's really encouraging. It's like we're giving our listeners permission to play with language, to to have fun with it and not be afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly. Mistakes are part of the learning process. The important thing is to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep expanding those linguistic horizons.
Well, our deep dive today has definitely expanded mine. We've uncovered so much more than just definitions. We've explored the hidden connections between these expressions, the cultural context they come from, and even the psychology behind why we use them.
It's amazing what you can discover when you take a deep dive into something as seemingly simple as everyday phrases. They're not just words. They're like little capsules of culture, history, and human nature.
Speaking of discoveries, there's one more thing I want to touch on before we wrap up. Remember how we talked about throwing shade being a kind of subtle criticism? I think that idea deserves a little more attention.
Oh, what are you thinking?
It's like we've stumbled upon this whole secret language of criticism. We explored throwing shade, but even let the cat out of the bag can have that critical edge, right? Like, oops, you accidentally revealed something you shouldn't have, and now you're in trouble.
You're right. There's often an implied judgment there. It makes you think, why do we have so many ways to criticize indirectly? Why not just come right out and say what we mean?
Maybe it's about saving face. Both for the person criticizing and the person being criticized. Like, I'm not going to directly confront you, but you should probably get the hint.
That's a great point. It goes back to what we were discussing earlier about navigating social situations. Sometimes a direct approach is necessary, but other times a bit of subtlety can be more effective, or at least less awkward.
It's like, those times when you want to tell a friend their new haircut isn't really working, but you don't want to hurt their feelings. So you say something like, wow, that's a bold choice.
Exactly. You're expressing an opinion, but with a layer of indirection. And that's where idioms and slang can be so powerful. They allow us to deliver these nuanced messages without being overly confrontational.
So it's not just about sounding clever or using fancy phrases. It's about understanding the social dynamics of language, how we use words to build relationships, to express ourselves, and sometimes even to protect ourselves.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the importance of understanding the cultural context behind these expressions. What might be considered a playful jab in one culture could be deeply offensive in another.
So for our listeners who are learning English, it's not just about memorizing the dictionary definition of an idiom or a slang term. It's about understanding the unwritten rules of how and when to use them.
Exactly. Pay attention to how native speakers use these expressions. Observe the tone, the body language, the context. It's like learning a secret code that unlocks a deeper level of cultural understanding.
I love that analogy. It's like we're giving our listeners the key to a whole new world of communication.
And the more keys you collect, the more fluent and confident you become in navigating the complexities of the English language.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
First and foremost, I hope they've gained a newfound appreciation for the power of idioms and slang. They're not just quirky additions to the language, they're tools for expressing ourselves with nuance, humor, and cultural awareness.
It's like we've peeled back the layers of these everyday phrases and discovered a whole world of hidden meaning.
And for anyone learning English, I hope this deep dive has encouraged them to embrace these expressions, even if they seem confusing at first. Don't be afraid to ask questions, experiment, and gradually incorporate them into your vocabulary.
It's all about taking that deep dive, exploring the origins, and uncovering the stories behind the words. And who knows, maybe you'll discover some other linguistic treasures along the way.
Exactly. Language is a constantly evolving landscape, and there's always something new to learn.
So, as we leave our listener today, I have one final thought to ponder. What other expressions have you encountered that make you curious about their origins? What hidden stories are waiting to be uncovered? Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that love of language alive.
Until next time. You're right. There's often like this implied judgment,
Yeah.
And it makes you think, like, why do we have so many ways to criticize indirectly?
Right. Why not just, come right out and say what we mean?
Exactly.
Maybe it's about saving face,
Yeah.
for both the person criticizing and the person being criticized. Like, hey, I'm not going to, directly confront you, but
Right.
you should probably get the hint.
That's a great point. It goes back to what we were discussing earlier about,
Yeah.
Navigating those social situations. You know?
Yeah.
Sometimes a direct approach is necessary, but other times, a bit of subtlety can be much more effective, or at least less awkward.
Yeah, for sure. It's like those times when You want to tell a friend that their new haircut isn't really working for them, but you don't want to hurt their feelings.
Right.
So, you say something like, wow, that's a bold choice.
Exactly. You're expressing an opinion, but with that layer of indirection.
Yeah.
And that's where idioms and slang can be so powerful. They allow us to deliver these nuanced messages without being overly confrontational.
It's true. It's not just about, sounding clever or using these fancy phrases. It's about understanding the social dynamics of language itself.
Yeah.
How we use words to build relationships, to express ourselves, and sometimes even to protect ourselves, right?
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the importance of understanding the cultural context behind these expressions.
Right.
What might be considered a playful jab in one culture could be like deeply offensive in another.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So for our listeners who are learning English, it's not just about memorizing the dictionary definition of, an idiom or a slang term. It's about understanding the unwritten rules of how and when to use them.
Exactly. Pay attention to how native speakers use these expressions. Observe the tone, the body language, the context.
Yeah.
It's like learning a secret code that unlocks a deeper level of cultural understanding.
I love that analogy. It's like we're giving our listeners the keys to a whole new world of communication.
And the more keys you collect, the more fluent and confident you become in navigating, the complexities of the English language.
I like that.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
Well, first and foremost, I hope they've gained a newfound appreciation for the power of idioms and slang. They're not just quirky additions to the language. They're tools for expressing ourselves with, nuance, humor, and cultural awareness.
Absolutely. It's like we've peeled back the layers of these everyday phrases and discovered a whole world of hidden meaning.
And for anyone learning English, I hope this deep dive has encouraged them to, embrace these expressions, even if they seem a little confusing at first.
Right.
Don't be afraid to ask questions, experiment, and, gradually incorporate them into your vocabulary.
It's all about taking that deep dive, exploring the origins, and uncovering the stories behind the words. And who knows, maybe you'll discover some other linguistic treasures along the way.
Exactly. Language is a constantly evolving landscape, and there's always something new to learn.
So as we leave our listener today, I have one final thought to ponder. What other expressions have you encountered that make you curious about their origins? What hidden stories are waiting to be uncovered? Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that love of language alive.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we've stumbled upon this whole secret language of criticism.
Right. It's fascinating.
We explored throwing shade, but even let the cat out of the bag can have that, critical edge to it.
Oh, totally. Like, oops, you accidentally revealed something you shouldn't have, and now you're in trouble.
Yeah, like there are consequences.
Exactly. So it's not just about surprise. It's also about, blame or judgment.
It is, and that's so interesting, right?
Yeah, it really is. It makes you think about all the different ways we use language to express those subtle criticisms. It's like a whole art form.
It is, and it's so important to be aware of those nuances, especially if you're, learning English or interacting with people from different cultures. What might be considered a harmless comment in one context could be, totally inappropriate in another.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like what might be seen as just playful teasing among friends could be really hurtful if said to a stranger or someone in a position of authority.
Exactly. Context is everything.
It really is. So for our listeners who are learning English, it's not just about understanding the literal meaning of these idioms and slang phrases. It's about paying attention to, the social cues, the tone of voice, the body language.
Right. All those unspoken rules that native speakers often take for granted.
Yeah. It's like learning a secret code, almost. A code that unlocks a deeper understanding of the culture and how people communicate.
It's true. And the more you understand those codes, the more confident you'll feel in navigating different social situations.
So, to wrap things up today, what's one key message you want our listeners to take away from our deep dive into idioms and slang?
Well, more than anything, I want them to remember that language is so much more than just words. It's a reflection of who we are, how we think, and how we connect with each other.
It's like a mirror reflecting our culture, our history, our values.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to approach language with curiosity, with a sense of wonder and playfulness. Don't be afraid to explore, to make mistakes, to ask questions. That's how we learn and grow.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring those hidden corners of the English language. Keep discovering those surprising connections and unexpected meanings. You never know what you might find. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
Happy exploring!